The government remains in partial shutdown as Trump says he will not sign funding legislation until he receives money to begin a wall on the Mexican border. Democrats continue to howl with rage against the president.
No Democrat has called for shutting the government down. We are all working to avoid it. The president seems to relish it.
It's a governing crisis. We better face the reality. This is a dangerous time. This is not just another government shutdown.
Donald Trump is on track to be the worst president in modern times, and perhaps ever. The days of waiting for this president to change how he operates, and the days of hoping that he can somehow achieve more and do better, those days are behind us.
But let me just say this. The president, he's unraveled. Things are unraveling. Would you prefer chaos? It's chaotic.
This shutdown is on the president because he has caused such division, he can't even broker a deal on a side issue like this.
All righty. Trump, meanwhile, says the shutdown is squarely the fault of Democrats and their refusal to ever secure the border with Mexico.
I can't tell you when the government's going to be open. I can tell you it's not going to be open until we have a wall, a fence, whatever they'd like to call it. I'll call it whatever they want. The people of this country want border security. You know, it's not a question of me. I'd rather not be doing shutdowns. These federal workers want the wall. The only one that doesn't want the wall are the Democrats because they don't mind open borders. The only time they went against it, there was only one time when Donald Trump said we want to build the wall. As soon as I said I want to build the wall, they were all against it.
All righty. Well, Dan Bongino is a former Secret Service agent and the author of Spygate, the attempted sabotage of Donald J. Trump. Robin Biro is a former regional campaign director for Barack Obama. They both join us now. Welcome aboard, you guys. Thanks for joining me.
Good to be here.
Thank you so much.
So look, Dan, I've got to say to you, it's funny to watch, of course, the Democrats, the doom and gloom. I mean, we've just moved through the Christmas holiday. The sky is falling. We're looking for grubs and puddle water to eat and drink, through the shutdown. Do you think that this kind of complaint is really changing the point of view of the American people about what's really happening in Washington and what matters when it comes to national security versus a negotiation to get what we need for that border wall?
No, I don't think the media is changing one mind out there, Tammy, but for a very specific reason. Listen, chaos is not a brand, okay? It's not a brand you want to run. Even Richard Nixon figured that out, running on a Law and Order platform of all people, right? Nixon figured that out. Chaos is not a brand. Well, I say that because the Democrats haven't offered anything of substance outside of cheap rhetoric about actually supporting border security. There's just a terrific segment with Steve Miller on another network confronting a media figure about this specifically. What have the Democrats done to secure the border? And you know what the answer is? Let's go to the next segment because they just don't have anything.
Well, Dan, I see Robin's head nodding over there.
Yes,
but really,
you know it.
There's the Democrats argue that there is border security and then there is the border wall. And yet we know, Robin, that where there are wall sections, the illegal traffic goes down over 90%. So historically, we know this works. We know it works in this country. I think all three of us can agree we want this chaos to end. It's not good for the country.
Yes.
It's not good for the migrants. It's not good for the American citizens. So what exactly is going on that the Democrats think is working so well, considering the chaos that's occurring right now?
We've got several problems, and let's call out the hypocrisy from my own party, because in 2006, we did support the Secure Fence Act, which erected more than 700 miles of border on our southeast border. So we've got to own that, and I think the president would be very wise to pitch this not as a wall, but as expanding what we already agreed to on a bipartisan measure when senators at the time, Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, both voted for this. I think that would be a great way for him to pitch this as a fence, as you've heard his language changing.
Yeah, he said
recently.
he would call it whatever they want him to call it. And Robin, though, isn't that, though, kind of somewhat juvenile that you want to change the name of something and yet the action would be the same? Because you're right. The Secure Fences Act, the construction that already occurred is the thing that is helping us. Why are they suddenly against it now? Is it really just politics and because it's campaigning? Is that what it is?
I'm not going I'm not going to give you any BS. The reason that they're doing this is because of optics. Each side, you're smart, and you know that each side has got to find a way to save face with their base. So right now, by pitching this as a fence, that allows my party a chance to save face and say, hey, we can't give you a fortified concrete wall, but we can give you a funding for a fence as long as. Now, Dick Durbin made a great point on the networks on Sunday by saying that only 1 out of every 5 vehicles coming across the border are being screened right now. So what he'd like to see is more funding for that in addition to funding for a fence. I think that we've got some inroads here. I honestly do believe there is a way ahead. It's just got to be in a way that we both can pitch it to our fence, to our bases.
That becomes, Dan, the question is how far does the president go? Does he never sign a bill until he look, he's compromising. They're already talking about $2.5 billion. The president is a master negotiator. He knows that they're going to find some place in the middle unless the Democrats just genuinely don't care. How far does the president take this, Dan?
Well, the president's a deal maker. He's built buildings in New York, where I grew up, the toughest place on earth to do business. And I got to tell you, it's rare that I'm on debating a Democrat on the network. But Robin's right. There's going to have to be some face-saving measures on both sides. Both of us would be naive, all three of us, to say that. I think if you want to call it a fence, if you want to call it a wall, as long as it's an obstacle that will prevent the illegal flow of people across our border, I think the American people will be fine with that. One more thing, Tammy. The Border Patrol people I talk to as well don't seem to mind the idea of slats because they can see through it on the other side. Sure. It's a deterrent. It's an obstacle. The American people want border security. If it allows Democrats to save some kind of face but stops illegal immigration, not in its tracks, nothing's going to stop it completely, but puts an obstacle in front of it, then I think that's fine, and I think everybody walks away
happy. We know
the
Democrats understand that because the preface before always saying they don't want the wall is that they care about border security. So Democrats, Americans who happen to be Democrats, they care about their families as well. They care about the nature of what's happening at the border now. Democrats, none of us want to hear stories about children dying in the midst of a trek that should never have happened in the first place. These are the things that unite us. And I think that this is where we can have a good conversation. The president knows it. And hopefully these games will end. But the president's position is based, of course, in a national security framework for all of these individuals, not just American citizens, Robin, you would agree, but for the individuals making these 1,000-mile treks with their children. No one should be accepting this environment as being acceptable or something that should be encouraged. We really need to have a system that stops that. You would agree?
Absolutely. And we need comprehensive immigration reform. And I want to clearly say that my party can absolutely not afford to be labeled as the party that embraces open borders, which is why we're trying to say there are other things that we need in addition to, at least at the minimum, a stronger fence.
Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, all they've been saying is he's never going to get the wall. He's never going to get it. They seem to be doubling down on an argument that this is the problem with liberals often, perhaps not you, but liberals a great deal, that they don't know when to stop. They misjudge the Kavanaugh dynamic. They're misjudging this, I contend.
Oh, yes.
And we need, the American people want solutions. This is what they're looking for. President Trump is a man of action. He's been consistent in his positions. You started this segment talking about how Democrats had voted for the Secure Fences Act. They have not been consistent. Why should we trust what the Democrats do once they take over the House of Representatives as being either believable or truthful?
Great question. And, I will just point out that on both sides, there are calm heads. There are also crazy people on both sides of the aisle. Those are the ones that get the most airtime in the media, unfortunately. But there are smart people like Dick Durbin who get it, who say that there are multilateral approaches that we can take to this.
Robin, you were so good. You were so good until you said Dick Durbin and the word smart in the same sentence. I just got a headache. All right, you guys. This is a great conversation. Dan, Robin. Terrific. Yes. I really appreciate it. Thanks. Have a great night. Merry Christmas.
Absolutely.
Look, for several days now, ICE has been releasing hundreds of migrant asylum seekers into a public park in El Paso, Texas, with apparently no plan for taking care of them. Fox chief correspondent Jonathan Hunt joins us now with more.
Good evening, Tammy. In all, several hundred migrants were released in El Paso, Texas from the weekend to Christmas Day without ICE apparently giving the usual advance notice to shelters and other groups that offer help to the migrants. Democratic Congressman Beto O'Rourke was among those greeting the migrants as they mulled their next move on Christmas Day.
ICE admitted that they dropped the ball, that they made a mistake yesterday by not giving the community any kind of heads up on releasing 214 migrants at the Greyhound bus station last night and early this morning.
And activists who usually coordinate with ICE were also caught unawares.
We're a little perplexed because this is not something that ICE typically does.
In a statement, ICE blamed, quote, decades of inaction by Congress for limiting its ability to detain and promptly remove families in the United States illegally, and went on, quote, to mitigate the risk of holding family units past the time frame allotted to the government, ICE has curtailed reviews of post-release plans from families apprehended along the southwest border. That statement obviously doesn't directly address the situation in El Paso over the last couple of days, but it did also say, quote, ICE is redoubling its efforts to work with local and state officials and NGO partners in the area so they are prepared to provide assistance with transportation or other services. Now, Tammy, it's not clear whether the lack of communication between ICE and the shelter organizations is being affected by the government shutdown, but it is worth noting that many ICE staff deemed non-essential are not working right now. Tammy?
Yeah, well, Jonathan, thank you. At the same time, wouldn't you agree, though, that certainly the Customs and Border Patrol is swamped and that ICE is swamped? We've got, they're releasing hundreds right now into El Paso, but we're dealing with thousands of people who clearly they're releasing them based on the Family Separation Act, that they are just overwhelmed at this point, regardless of...
Yeah. You're absolutely right, Tammy. You talk to any agents who work the border area, and that is exactly the kind of word that they would use, that they are overwhelmed. One other point that I think is interesting, it's not at all clear that all of these who've been released in El Paso were asylum seekers. Some of them may simply have been illegal immigrants. Right. That points to catch and release taking place. That, of course, is something that President Trump says it doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, so obviously more work to do. Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you for that report. Now, Kris Kobach is the Kansas Secretary of State. He joins us now. Kris, you are a man. You've been working on this for quite some time, for years. You know what the situation is. This is not unfamiliar to you either. Can you give us a sense, really, as people might want to blame the shutdown, but this is really chaos that is unfolding, and an overwhelmed Customs and Border Protection Force, overwhelmed ICE perhaps, because they're contained, if you will, by certain court decisions about what they can and cannot do. What do you think is going on in El Paso now, and should the people there be concerned about what's happening?
Well, first of all, you're correct when you suggest this is not because of the government shutdown. Enforcement and removal operations of ICE, that's the division that handles this type of duty, they're essential employees. They're working at full steam regardless of the shutdown. There might be some public affairs officers who normally, contact the press and things like that who might not be working, but it's not caused by the shutdown. Secondly, although the numbers this week in El Paso are large and larger than normal, people should be aware that there are, if you look nationally, thousands of people being released into the United States who are asylum seekers, not necessarily worthy of asylum, but claiming that they are, every month. And so this is a big problem. Here, this number should shock you. In the last 5 years, the number of asylum claims in the United States system has gone up 2,000%. There are almost 800,000 asylum cases pending in our immigration courts. And the vast majority of those are not legitimate. It's estimated that these Central American claims, well over 90%, are going to be denied. They're not even close to being a legitimate claim of asylum. Asylum requires that your government back home is persecuting you, and you have a well-founded fear of being hurt because of your membership in a particular social group. Whereas these people are coming in saying, well, I've got gangs in my neighborhood. And so this asylum loophole has become a massive loophole that is causing a huge problem for the whole system. So it is a big problem. This is just a symptom.
And we're letting these people out, of course, presuming they'll come back. This is the old game to get their court hearing, and then they just never show up. But we also learned a couple weeks ago from Secretary Nielsen of the Department of Homeland Security that we have an arrangement with Mexico now that they would hold people who are looking for asylum until we can adjudicate them. Do you think that's really going to happen, or do you think that we're still is the president still going to have to go and try to get this done through the courts, which clearly seem to be resistant to him being able to control the border?
Well, a little of both. So I think that what Secretary Nielsen announced last week is a big first. It's not a first step. It's a big step in the right direction for those people who haven't yet crossed into the United States. But most of the people we're talking about here in El Paso, they were already in the United States when they were apprehended, many of them anyway.
Right.
And for those people, what DHS needs to do right away is to finalize a proposed regulation that they promulgated back in September. And that regulation will override what's called the Flores settlement, which is why we're releasing all these people, and allow the detention of complete family units together until their case is adjudicated finally.
Kris,
and we've got to get that done right away, and there's no time to waste.
Yeah, because that's a question. What do we do next? And that's a great point. Thank you, sir, for joining us. I appreciate it. Have a great night.
My